Om Arunachala Shiva.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this exploration of Sri Ramana Maharshi's philosophy, which will be focused on the transition from becoming to being. In this lecture, we will be discussing the meaning of becoming and the nature of being, and how to transcend the cycle of striving to realize our true essence. We will base our discussion on Sri Ramana's writings, particularly his works Ulladu Narpadu, 40 Verses on Reality, Nanyar, and Who Am I? Who Am I? And Upadesa Saram. Everybody knows who Sri Ramana was, and that he is one of the most significant modern exponents of Advaita Vedanta. I based this lecture also on the experience of Sri Michael James, who lived for 20 years in the ashram of Arunachala when Sadhu Om still was living, and he translated with him books and all the works of Sri Ramana Maharshi. What else? Let's start. The desire of happiness is the driving force behind all the countless forms of efforts that we are always making. Every action is motivated by the desire to be perfectly happy, but even if it seems that happiness derives from external objects and the attainment of them, truly speaking, happiness arises only from within us. In the center of our being, there always exists a state of perfect peace and joy. But desires and fear, in the form of countless identifications, agitate the mind and obscure from its view the happiness that is always there. When a desire is satisfied, for example, we seem to be happy, but actually the agitation of the mind has temporarily subsided, and we are just tasting its own innate happiness. Therefore, happiness lies within us, in the very core of our being, and not in external object. In other words, it is a state of being and not of becoming. To understand completely this, we have to understand that self-knowledge and self-surrender are strictly connected and must be cultivated. Living in the daily world is the perfect outward situation in which Sri Ramana has placed us in order to motivate us strongly to seek true peace and happiness only within ourselves. And every time we have to deal with many egos, including our own, we are being given a good opportunity to practice humility by keeping our own ego subsided when it is tempted to rise and assert itself. To keep our ego subsided in all circumstances, the easiest and the most effective means is just to cling tenaciously to self-attentiveness. As Sri Ramana often said, there is nothing so humbling as the simple question, who am I? And the only effective way of truly asking this question is just to scrutinize our own consciousness, I, deeply and persistently. Sri Ramana often said that there are only two means by which we can attain the experience of true self-knowledge. That is investigation and self-surrender. However, he also said that these two means or spiritual paths are truly one in essence. That is, though they are described in different words, in their actual practice they are identical. According to ancient philosophy of Vedanta, there are four paths that lead to spiritual emancipation, namely the path of desireless action, or karma marga, the path of devotion, or bhakti marga, the path of union, or yoga marga, and the path of knowing, or jnana marga. Of these four paths, the second and the fourth are the principal means, while the first and the third are merely subsidiary aspects of these two principal means. In other words, all the various types of spiritual practices or paths can in essence be reduced to these two principal paths, the path of knowing and the path of devotion. We can attain a spiritual emancipation or salvation only by experience through self-knowledge. That is, by knowing ourselves to be only the real and infinite spirit or consciousness I am, and not this unreal and finite individual that now we imagine to be. In order to know ourselves as the absolute reality, we must be consumed by intense love for our essential being. Because if we are not consumed by such love, we will not be willing enough to let go of our false individual self. The term Atma Chintana literally means self-thought or thought of oneself, but in this context, the word Chintana or thought does not actually mean thought in the sense of a mental activity. Our mind is active only when we attend to anything other than ourselves, that is, to the outward things. And all its activity will therefore cease when we try to think only of ourselves. That is, when we try to think only to ourselves, our attention will be withdrawn from all other thoughts and will remain motionlessly focused on ourselves in a state of complete silence, mauna. In this state of clear self-attentiveness, we do not rise as the separate thinking consciousness that we call our mind or individual self. And so this is the state of complete self-surrender. All action or doing, including our basic action of thinking or knowing thoughts, is a result of our failure to surrender our false individual self. We feel that we are thinking and doing other things only because we imagine ourselves to be this thinking mind and this doing body. To know ourselves as the light of pure awareness, which is the eternal experience of infinite happiness, devoid of even the slightest trace of any fear, we do not need to do anything at all, but just be as we always actually are, with our entire attention fixed firmly on ourselves alone. We seem to be bound by karma or action, and to be consequently immersed in the devastating state of repeatedly being born and dying only because we have risen as ego, and thereby mistake ourselves to be a body, which is born, which engages in action and dies. So this is just a false awareness of ourselves, and we will cease, when we will cease to rise as ego, we will know ourselves as our true nature. Since self-investigation is the only means by which we can know ourselves as we actually are, the easiest means by which we can know ourselves is to focus all our interest, attention, and effort on investigating ourselves, instead of wasting time on trying to follow any other path. Abiding in being does not require renunciation of worldly life. Instead, it involves inward detachment from the ego while performing actions spontaneously and selflessly. We remember Upadesa Saram, verse 3, action performed with ego leads to bondage. Action performed without ego is free and liberating. In other words, the philosophy of Sri Ramana guides us from the turmoil of becoming to the peace of being. In fact, the journey is not about attaining something, but simply realizing what we have always been, that we are always been present. What Bhagavan implies by just being is resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body. Not in a manoleya or temporary dissolution of mind, but only in manonasa, which is annihilation of mind, the destruction of mind. Every time we allow our attention to move away from ourself, that movement is a mental activity. And mental activities give rise to activities of speech and body. So we can avoid being entangled in any kind of action only to the extent to which we do not allow our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else. I want to remember that the seeds from which all thoughts or mental activities sprout are called Visaya Vasanas. That means phenomenon, and are the inclinations to attend to any experience or phenomena. For instance, our mental habits, our likes and dislikes, our desires, which give rise to emotions, feelings, thoughts, perceptions, and so on. So, thoughts will not cease until all Visaya Vasanas are destroyed. The root of all Vasanas is ego, because they are its inclination, and since it is the nature of ego to have Visaya Vasanas, they cannot be destroyed entirely until ego itself is eradicated. In order to eradicate ego, it is necessary, however, to weaken our vasanas to a considerable extent, because they are strong. And so long as they are strong, we will not be sufficiently willing to be so keenly self-attentive to subside completely and lose ourselves forever in our source. In fact, Visaya Vasanas, our inclination, have no strength of their own, except for the strength we give to them. So we can weaken them only by not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. The only means is clinging firmly to self-attentiveness. In this way, we are not allowing ourselves to be swayed by any Visaya Vasanas. It's important to say that we can cling to self-attentiveness only to the extent to which we love to be self-attentive. Love to be self-attentive is the so-called sattvasana, the inclination or liking to attend only to our being, and thereby to be as we actually are. To the extent that our sattvasana is strengthened, our Visaya vasanas will be weakened, and vice versa, because they are opposite inclinations. But all the vasanas, as I said before, can be destroyed only when their root, the ego, is completely eradicated, because it is the nature of ego to have vasanas. Another verse from Upadesa Saram says that the cause of falling in the vast ocean of action the fruit is impermanent and obstructs liberation. That means that the cause of falling in the vast ocean of action, namely in Visaya Vasanas, also known as Karma Vasanas, our inclination to seek happiness or satisfaction in experiencing Visaya Vasanas is impermanent and therefore obstructs our liberation. But if we persistently practice, we finally manage to be so keenly self-attentive that ego is dissolved forever in manonasa, and all vasanas will be erased, and what will then remain will be our pure awareness, our infinite life, that is Sat Chit Ananda. When we identify ourselves with our body or speech or mind, we will feel that the action of these instruments are being done by us. For example, I'm walking, I'm talking, I'm listening, I'm reading, and so on. And this is an effect of our identification with the body, the speech, the emotions, and the mind. All our actions and all our dualistic knowledge arise only because we identify ourselves with these instruments of action and knowledge. This entire body-mind complex, so to speak. Since complete and perfect surrender is the state in which we have entirely renounced our individual self and all the connection with its body and mind, it is a state devoid of any action and knowledge of duality. That which feels I am doing or I am knowing is not our real self, but only the ego. The nature of our real self is just to be, and not to doing this or knowing anything other. Therefore, we have truly surrendered our finite individual self when we will remain as mere being. And we will not feel that we are doing anything or knowing something, anything other than our own state of self-consciousness being. The state of true surrender is therefore a state of just being and not a state of doing or becoming something. The practice of self-surrender is the cultivation of the skill just to be, and not to be this or that, or becoming this or becoming that. This cultivation, this growing, includes an important act of surrender. Thy will be done, not my will, but only thine. So in this way, we will be able to gradually reduce the strength of our own individual will, our vasanas, which force us to be active. The more we are able to reduce the power of our individual will, the more our mind will subside, and the closer we will come to the state of just being. Of course, in order to surrender completely, we must give up all our desires. We all desire to be happy. All our action, good or bad, virtuous or sinful, are motivated by our desire for happiness. However, our liking to be happy exists in two forms. One which is correctly called love, and the other which is correctly called desire. But what is the difference between our love to be happy and our desire to be happy? Love is the only suitable word that we can use to describe the liking to be happy that is inherent in our very being. Happiness is our very being, our own real self. So our liking for happiness, in essence, is just our love for our own being, real being. Therefore, we can be completely free of desire only when our natural love of happiness is directed towards nothing other than our own essential being. The obstacle that prevents us from surrendering ourselves entirely is our desire to obtain happiness from anything other than ourselves. So long as we remain as our infinite consciousness of being, which is what we truly always are, we can experience nothing other than ourselves. In such a state, nothing exists for us to desire, and therefore we are perfectly peaceful and happy in ourselves. So we can say the root cause of all our desires is our forgetfulness or ignorance of our own real self. So to experience true and perfect freedom, we must give up all our desires, both our bad desires and our noble desires, which we can do only by knowing ourselves as we really are. In the 13th paragraph of Nanyar, when defining true self-surrender as the state of thought-free self-abidance, Sri Ramana described it as giving ourselves to God. And he goes on to explain the practice of self-surrender in terms of dualistic devotion to God. Being completely absorbed in self-abidance, given not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than self-contemplation, is giving ourselves to God. Even though we place whatever amount of burden upon God, that entire amount will be bare. Since one Parameshvara Shakti, supreme power of God, is driving all activities, Why should we always think it's necessary for me to act in this way? It's necessary for me to act in that way, instead of being calm, peaceful, and happy, having yielded ourselves together with our entire burden to that power, supreme controlling power. Though we know that the train is carrying all the burdens, why should we who travel in it suffer by carrying our small luggage on our head instead of leaving it placed on that train? A question arises. Why does Sri Ramana explain self-surrender in such dualistic terms? The need to surrender ourselves arises only when we mistake ourselves to be a finite individual. And in this state, we experience all duality as if it were real. So long as we feel ourselves to be a finite person or individual consciousness, the world and God, both of them exist as in entities that are separate from us. God, as a separate being, is as real as our own separate individuality. Because we have limited ourselves as a finite individual, the infinite love and power, which is our own real self, appears to us to be separate from us. And therefore we give it the name God. It is this power of our own real self that Sri Ramana describes here as the one Parameshvara Shakti, the one supreme God power or supreme ruling power. Everything that happens in this world happens only by the will of God. And since by the will of God, and since He is all loving, nothing can happen that is not for the true benefit of all. Since God is therefore bearing the entire burden of this universe, He can perfectly well bear any burden that we may place upon Him. But what exactly do we mean when we speak of placing our burden upon Him? And how can we do so? We all feel that we have some cares and responsibility. But since God is responsible for everything, and since He's taking perfectly good care of everything, the truth is that we need to take any care. We need not to take care, excuse me, sorry, of responsibility upon ourselves. Our only responsibility is to surrender ourselves to Him. That is to yield our individual will to His divine will, which simply means to give up all our personal desires, fears, likes, and dislikes, and leave all our cares and worries in His perfectly capable hands, in His perfectly capable hands. When we have truly surrendered ourselves to Him, we will not exist as an individual to think. We will have lost ourselves in all the consuming fire of true self-knowledge, and therefore we will only remain as mere being. Until such time, we should conduct ourselves anyway with perfectly humility, inwardly and outwardly, and we should never imagine that we have gained any sort of spiritual achievement. So long as we are aware of any otherness or duality, we are still mistaking ourselves to be a finite individual. And so we should understand that we have not truly surrendered ourselves. Avoiding any form of pride or self-delusion is an integral part of self-surrender. True self-surrender is a total self-denial. As individuals, we are nothing and should understand this. Without the aid of God, we are absolutely powerless to do anything, even to surrender ourselves to Him. Therefore, if we truly wish to surrender, we should pray for His aid. Our responsibility is not to do anything, but just to be. In order to be, we must reject our mind along with its sense of doership and becoming, and simply surrender ourselves to the supreme power of love that we call God. This truth is clearly implied by Sri Ramana in verse 8 of Upadesa Saram. Rather than Anya Bhava, Ananya Bhava, with the conviction he is he, I, is indeed the best among all forms of meditation. In this context, bhava means meditation. Therefore, in whatever manner we may practice devotion to God, it is always better to consider Him to be our own real self rather than considering Him to be other than ourselves. The state of just being in which our mind has completely subsided is not only the pinnacle of true devotion or love, but is also the ultimate goal and the fulfillment of the other three spiritual paths, the path of desireless action, union, and knowing, as affirmed by Sri Ramana in verse 10 of Upadesa Saram. Having subsided in our rising place, the core of our being, which is the source from which we had risen as our mind, that is karma, that is bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. Thus, complete self-surrender is the true goal of all forms of spiritual practice. Even self-investigation, which is the true path of knowing or jnana, is necessary only because we have not yet surrendered ourselves completely. Since the correct practice of self-investigation is not doing anything, but is just being, we cannot practice it correctly without surrendering ourself, our doing, our becoming, our thinking mind. Conversely, since we cannot effectively surrender our false finite self without knowing what we really are, the correct practice of self-surrender is to keenly scrutinize ourselves and thereby to subside in the state of just being. Thus, in practicing self-investigation and self-surrenders, the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender are inseparable from each other, like the two sides of a single sheet of paper. It is unnecessary for us to do anything, and it is unnecessary for us to think anything. If we truly believe that God is doing everything and is always taking care of every living being, including ourselves, we will have the confidence to place upon Him the burden of thinking for us, and thus will be free of the burden of thinking anything for ourselves. If we really surrender, God will take full control of our mind, speech, and body, and will make them act in whatever ways appropriate in all situations. Only when we thus cease to think anything will our surrender to God be complete. True self-surrender is a state of just being. Once we are caught in the influence of the real guru, we are like the prey that has been caught in the jaws of a tiger. Just as a tiger will unfailingly devour the prey it has caught, so Guru will unfailingly devour us, destroying our mind or individual consciousness, and thereby absorbing us into himself. That is, making us one with our own true and essential being, which is what he really is. However, Sri Ramana says that the Guru will save surely us in this manner, but he will never forsake us, but we should follow the path that he has shown us unfailingly. with the practice, by practicing the twin path of self-investigation and self-surrender that he has thought. Sorry for the interruption. We're talking about the grace of God or Guru, which is always providing us all the help we need to follow the spiritual path. And that we should take full advantage of this help by turning our mind inwards and thereby remaining on our natural state of just being, which is the true state of self-investigation and self-surrender. God or Guru is always bestowing grace upon us by shining within us as I am, as we can find in the Bhagavad Gita said by Lord Krishna. But we must reciprocate that grace or love by attending. Our only unique duty is to attend to I am. But there is a reason why we have not yet attained salvation, and that reason is that we continue to ignore this true form of grace, which ever shines within us as I am. In order to know our true nature, which is absolute, infinite, eternal, and undivided being consciousness, bliss, or Sat Chit Ananda, we must be willing to surrender our false ego. And in order to surrender, we must be consumed and overwhelmed by a very, very great love, an overwhelming love to know our true nature. If we are spiritually mature, the intensity of our desire for and attachment to external things will be greatly reduced. Therefore, when we think of death, we will not fear to lose any external thing, but will only fear to lose our own existence or being. When we subside into our heart, the innermost core of our being, where we are free from all adjuncts, all thoughts, all imagination, all duality, and all forms of limitation, our mind will disappear in this absolute clarity of that pure self-consciousness. Just as an imaginary snake will disappear when we see clearly that we mistook it to be a snake, but in fact it is only a rope. Because our mind is a false knowledge about ourselves, an imagination that we are a material body. The experience of true self-knowledge will reveal that is unreal. Therefore, the death that we will experience when we surrender our false individual self in the absolute clarity of true self-knowledge is the death of our mind, which is not a true death, because when our body dies, our mind will create for itself another body by its power of imagination. So, as long as our mind survives, it will continue creating for itself one body after another. So, the only true death is the death of our own mind, manona, which is called manonasa in Sanskrit language. However, even if the experience of true self-knowledge is described as the death of destruction of our mind, we should imagine that this implies that our mind has never really existed. The death of our mind is like the death of a snake that we imagine we see in the dim light of a night. In the morning, when the sun rises, the imaginary snake will disappear, because we will clearly see that it is in fact only a rope Similarly, in the clear light of true self-knowledge, our mind will disappear because we will clearly recognize that it is in fact only our infinite and non-dual consciousness of our own essential being. So, just as the snake does not really die, because it never actually existed, so our mind will not really die because it has never actually existed. So its death is real only relative to its present seeming existence. The experience of true self-knowledge may be described as the death of our ego and as the birth of our real self. In reality, it is the state in which we know that our real self alone exists, that it has always existed, and that our mind or our real self has never truly existed. Since death is a thought, and even the thinker of death is a thought, the true state of deathlessness or immortality is only the thought-free state of absolutely clear self-conscious being, the state in which our thinking mind has died. When we completely surrendered, abide permanently in this egoless and free, mind-free state, we will never again be able to imagine the thought of death or any other thought. So, the essence of both self-investigation and self-surrender is just being. So long as we feel ourselves to be thinking or doing or becoming anything, our attention is not focused entirely upon our own being. And therefore, we have not yet surrendered. The essence of all spiritual practice can just be summarized in these two words: just be. We are so habituated to doing and to considering that we cannot achieve anything without doing something, that we tend to think, what have I to do? What must I do in order to just be? Even if we have understood that being is not doing or becoming anything, and that we therefore cannot do anything in order to be. But still, we wonder how we can refrain from thinking or doing anything. To save us from all such confusion, Sri Ramana gave us a simple clue to enable us. That is, he taught us that in order to be without doing anything, all we need to do is to focus our entire attention upon ourself, our essential being I am. So, even if this practice of focusing our attention upon our being may appear to be a doing, the only doing that it actually involves is the withdrawing of our attention from all other things. Because our attention in this way is withdrawn and allowed to settle on itself. And all the doing and all the becoming will have ceased, and only being will remain. Moreover, though this withdrawing of our attention may appear to be a doing or action, it is actually just a subsiding and cessation of all activities. Since our mind rises and becomes active only by attending to things other than itself, when it withdraws its attention back towards itself, it subsides and all its activity or doing ceases. So, Therefore, just as self-attentiveness automatically results in self-surrender, so self-surrender automatically results in self-attentiveness, which is through practice of self-investigation. I hope to have expressed myself in a clear way, since I'm out of practice of the English language. I never speak it. I teach it but I'm out of practice about the Tolkien, and I hope that the what I explained. What I understood by the studies of Sri Ramana's teachings and the explanations which have been given to me by Michael James. I can have put a little light on our mind. Thank you very much again. And so, Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.